Robert Deniro is back as another famed mobster. Actually, it's two. In the Alto Knights, Robert Deniro plays best friends turned feuding mobsters Vito Genovese and Frank Costello. The film was directed by Barry Levinson of Rain Man and Bugsy fame on a $50 million budget, although after 2 weeks the film has only made $60 million back. Distributor Warner Brothers is already struggling this year with high-profile releases in films like Mickey 17, with Paul Thomas Anderson's One Battle After Another costing $150 million. The film is not just failing commercially, critically the film sits at 39% on Rotten Tomatoes, although faring better with audiences at 71%. So with all that being said, where do I sit with this?
How do you know what he's going to do?
Trouble so hard. A good place to start with this film for me is the trailer that you've just watched. I've edited that now, so I know how that's going to come out in the edit. I know what it's going to look like. The final 10 seconds of that trailer is probably the most enjoyable bits and moments of this film. And I don't mean scenes. I don't mean watching the film those scenes were really impressive or anything. I literally just mean watching that 10 seconds of that trailer is the most impressive part of this film. Because those moments, when they become scenes in the film, are actually pretty shit and are dull, are boring, and offer no new life. Don't even offer anything you've seen before, but in a good way. Well acted, well directed, well edited, well scored. None of it is good. It is just dull. This film is a dull story from its base level, from before it was a film, just as a real, true story. This is a dull story. It doesn't end with a bang. It doesn't end with a climax. It doesn't end like Goodfellas, where, one of the guys goes off the rails, starts doing drugs, and ends up as a snitch. It doesn't have anything like that. It just ends with a guy calling the police, and then everyone that he works with in the mafia is picked up by the police, and then they're arrested. That's it. That's the end of the film. So everything that you see in the trailer of this film showing a descent into street warfare between two members of the same crime family. This sort of high-octane thriller between two American gangsters, well-known American gangsters. None of that is true. This is all for the trailer. That high-octane, blood-pumping music, or score, I would say, not even music, but the score, essentially, of the trailer. Sound effects, whatever you prefer to call it. That is all there to paint an illusion of what this movie is. In fact, what this movie is an incredibly slow, dull, lifeless attempt at a cash grab. An attempt to cash in on that Martin Scorsese, Goodfellas, Casino, The Irishman feel of what an American mafia movie is. There is nothing about this film that I can say is good enough for you to go and watch it. In every facet of this movie, it is a failure. It is a letdown. It is a disappointment. And ultimately, and unfortunately, it spells in an incredibly disappointing and depressing way the end of Robert De Niro's career. This film, to me, is the clearest evidence that we have that actors who are into their 80s should probably just call it a day. Can you do the job? Maybe. Should you do the job? That's a different question. And if the evidence is this film, and I was in a courtroom trying to argue yes or no that this film is evidence that actors shouldn't continue into their 80s, I would resolutely stand on the side of no, they should not continue. This performance reeks of someone who is attempting to still do what he has done for the last 50 or even 50, 60 years now. It's disappointing and downright depressing to watch a guy who is so iconic and influential in cinema go out the way that he is going out. There is a couple of scenes in this movie that I almost found funny. If it hadn't have been so depressing, I would have probably laughed in the cinema. There are a couple scenes where, De Niro is doing his American New York mafia voice. He's walking down a street or he's in a restaurant and he's going, "Hey, listen, I can't do the accent. I'm not going to do the accent. I thought I could and I can't. I'm not going to do it." But, he's having a conversation. He's going, "Oh, I was talking to this guy last week and I said, hey, Joey, what do you think about?" And he does this several times where you can see on screen he forgets what his lines are. He stutters, he mumbles, and he attempts to refocus himself and continue rather than cut and edit around his mistake. They simply attempt to continue through it, and it really does show his age in these moments when you can clearly see that this legendary actor can't remember some of his lines. And it's not complex lines. This isn't, a political drama. This is basic level mafia script, a basic level mafia script. It is stuff that he has done countless times before, and yet he just sort of stumbles through. He can't remember any of his lines. And genuinely with this, I'm coming away from it going, yeah, please, man, just call it a day. Just retire. We don't want to see you continue to go down this road. It's pretty upsetting. It's pretty sad. And we can see that you're done. And that's not a bad thing because you've done it very well. You'll probably go down as top 5 actors of all time. Top 10, certainly. And it's not in any way a fault on you that you want to continue going because you've done it for so long that it must be hard to give it up. But it's so obvious that your time has come. And again, there's nothing wrong with that. But just sit back, enjoy your twilight years, and allow us, the audiences, allow the directors and the writers and the producers and the other actors that you've worked with glow about you. Allow us to put you in that category of best actors ever. Continuing to do films like this is not helping you in or whatsoever. It's not helping you whatsoever. You should have probably ended with Killers of the Flower Moon. That should have been it. That would have been a good staple to end on. And you're now just sort of tarnishing your final work. We don't want you to see we don't want to see you go out on terrible movies that just come across as cash grabs for you when you don't need it. We all know you don't need that money. But yeah, De Niro in this film, bad. The rest of the cast also pretty bad. The one sort of bright spot is Cosmo Jarvis. I think is trying his best, but even he is made to be some sort of dim-witted mafia gangster, and he attempts his best with the lines that he's given. But even the lines that he is given just aren't particularly great. And when the screenwriter of this film is literally a 93-year-old man, I'm not expecting the lines or the script overall to be some mind-blowing thing. It kind of makes sense that the script just isn't there on a level that we would expect it to be for a De Niro movie or even for a Barry Levinson movie. And he's trying his best. Like I say, Cosmo Jarvis, he's the best of a bad bunch, but he's not gonna sell this movie. I'm not telling you to run out and see this because he's so good in it. He's not. He's just trying his best, and he's a bit comedic, but ultimately, there's just not enough there for us to be like, wow, look at Cosmo Jarvis. One thing that really stood out to me is how lackluster the editing of this movie is, because it is attempting to be this like fast talking wise guy, like back and forth, like I'm talking, then you're talking, I'm talking, then you're talking, and it's so quick and fast paced, and the acting is so good and high level that it feels comedic, even if what we're talking about is actually a serious moment. Even if we've just killed a guy, we're gonna bury him. What we're talking about is actually still comedic, and yet what this film fails to do is actually cut that dialogue so snappy that the dialogue can feel humorous. For some reason, it attempts clearly to do that, and yet every time there is a scene of that sort, there is half a second left, and then half a second left, and then half a second left, where you're given enough time to reflect on the individual line of dialogue that a character has said before the next person starts talking. And if you watch something like Goodfellas, you're never given time to reflect on a conversation or on an individual line of dialogue. You just have to sort of consume it all together and then reflect on it after the film. And as a result of that, all that you're really able to do is pick up on brief moments, and that creates a sort of comedic atmosphere. In this film, there is an attempt at that, and yet it utterly fails to do so. And instead, the dialogue just comes off as flat. The dialogue just comes off as boring and dull. And the editing also fails to actually make anything that is happening on screen, whether it be the action in quotes because there's very little of it, whether it be the violence again because there's very little of it, or whether it be the dialogue. None of the editing is actually good enough to make it seem this octane thriller that the film wants you to believe that it is. Although the movie is attempting to tell me that this is the beginning of the end for the American mafia, I really just don't see what is so high stakes about this film. You know, one of the only memorable moments of violence in this film is obviously when Frank Costello is shot at the beginning of the movie, and then there's a moment when two characters are shot on the roof of the neighborhood that these characters sort of hang out in. That scene when two characters are shot on, or essentially extras are shot on the roof of a building, they're essentially just extras. They are irrelevant in the grand scheme of things. They aren't gangsters. This isn't descending into street warfare. It is just a brief moment that attempts to show you the descent of Vincent Gigante, Genovese, sorry. Vito Genovese, sorry. Vincent Gigante is Cosmo Jarvis's character. But it attempts to show you Vito Genovese's descent into madness, and yet it only ever shows you one of these apparent moments when he goes crazy. And I have no idea why that is. I don't know if it is attempting to just stay in reality and they only confirm these two murders, or if they simply just didn't have the budget to shoot more of these scenes. But whatever the reason is, it's pretty dull, and it is pretty bad at showcasing you a apparently high stakes and full of blood and violence gang war. As a result of that, nothing that happens in the film actually feels like there is any stakes other than for the two characters at the heart of this, Vito and Frank. For any other character, I'm sort of just like, why are you getting involved in this? Just, this doesn't have anything to do with you. Your life isn't at stake here. You should just sort of disappear from this. What Scorsese is such a master of is making you feel like any character can die at any time, whilst also making the film humorous. And as the stakes in a Goodfellas is continuously upped and upped and upped, you feel as if the characters are more and more at risk. Whereas with this film, I never felt there was any risk for the main characters, Vito and Frank. And even with them, I didn't care about either of them. You know, Vito is an okay character, but he is a character that should have been played by Joe Pesci and yet is played by Robert De Niro. I expect that they just weren't able to get Joe Pesci in on this, although apparently Robert De Niro ended up wanting to play both characters. I'm assuming to show you the two sides of the Italian mafia, you know, to show you the buttoned up politician style of a Frank Costello, and then to show you the bloodbath and sort of psychotic nature of a Vito Genovese. It is to show you how both sides of the mafia exist in that, and how the Italian mafia can be both of those. Yet, despite that, both performances are pretty bad, as I've already said. And it is quite clear to me that Vito was intended to be played by Joe Pesci, and yet he isn't. And yet, and as a result of that, the character is pretty dull, and you can't really sell it. You don't really feel involved in anything that is going on. You don't really care about any of these characters, and therefore, you know, when the movie culminates in this ending where the mob bosses are meeting up, you don't actually care about what happens. And also, obviously, a part of that is the ending is so bad and is so boring. You know, oh, can I have the police, please? The mafia are meeting up here. You don't actually care about what happens to these characters. There is no interest that you can have as an audience member about, oh, who's going to make it out? And ultimately, the only one that makes it out is Frank, which the movie also weirdly spoils for you from the very beginning of the movie by opening it with narration that clearly takes place after the film has ended. You know, shooting in this documentary style, it shoots Frank Costello in this documentary style, recounting what has happened, which clearly demonstrates that he makes it out, but yet Vito Genovese isn't talking. So you're like, all right, well, he's either dead or in prison, and then it ends up being the latter. So let's wrap this up. I have to get out here. Unfortunately, I have to go to work. But this film is just an attempt to cash in. It is just, you know, it's that like De Niro being like, oh, one last hurrah, even though his last hurrah of mafia movies has already came. It was The Irishman, and then he effectively played a mafia sort of figure in Killers of the Flower Moon. If he had essentially waited by his phone and waited for Scorsese to ring him and ask him if he wanted to do another part, you would probably go, all right, I can sort of square that in my mind. It still might not be the greatest performance, as you see in this one, but you would have been like, I at least get it, why he has to come back for it. You know, directing wise, editing wise, acting wise, writing, script wise, there's nothing about this film that is redeeming. There isn't a redeeming quality in this film where I can go, all right, yeah, you should go out and see it for this. This is a boring, dull attempt for a bunch of 80, 90-year-olds to cash in one last time, who all have a combined age above 300, and yet they are attempting to cash in on a product that is long dead. No one cares about this style of movie anymore, unless it is coming from Martin Scorsese himself. No one is rushing out to see a film that is like Martin Scorsese's films, but isn't his itself. And even Scorsese's films are struggling to sell nowadays anyways. So I can't tell you enough to not go and watch this film. It is a waste of your time, and if nothing else in this video I can convince you of, then let me just tell you, I struggle to stay awake. I'm pretty sure there's about 5 or 10 seconds in the middle of this film where I was completely asleep. That should be enough to sell you on not going to see this movie. But anyways, if you made it this far, thank you for watching. I appreciate it. Bye.